Looks like the participants have kind of slowed, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this is our first edition of the Kentucky Comeback webinar series. I'm John Cox with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and just for background, the Kentucky Chamber launched the Kentucky Comeback campaign a couple weeks ago with support of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. The purpose of the Kentucky Comeback campaign is to help our fellow Kentuckians struggling with substance abuse disorder, also to help businesses in developing recovery-friendly work environments, and engage Kentuckians across the state, bringing in anyone and everyone to the table to discuss and promote smart criminal justice reforms. And for today's first discussion, we have a distinguished group of panelists from Central Kentucky who have already shown great leadership for many of these Kentucky Comeback initiatives. So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have two members from Madison County. We have State Representative Deanna Frazier, as well as Madison County Judge Executive Reagan Taylor. And joining us from Clark County is State Senator Ralph Alvarado. Thank you all for being here with us this afternoon, and welcome. And thanks to all those tuning in. So we'll go ahead and get started. Judge Taylor, I'm going to start with you. You've been very vocal in trying to find a solution that will address jail overcrowding. I know that's been a problem in Madison County, while also helping to meet the workforce demand that's created by businesses and employers. So tell us a little bit about your vision for this and what progress you've made on this front.
Well, I think we've made a lot of progress in bringing awareness to society, to our community, to our county, and really even across the Commonwealth. When I took office in 2015, I knew I had a jail problem, but I really didn't know what that meant. And putting together a jail task force where we worked for about 9 months, just researching and looking into the past and the present and what we foresaw in the future. We really came to the conclusion that we didn't have a jail problem; we had a drug problem. And just my private sector experience, to solve a problem, you got to get to the root issue. And so we really saw a need to try to combat this drug epidemic and try to turn it around. Our recidivism rates were out of the roof, about 80%. Drug-related crimes were about 85% of the people that were in our jail and incarcerated. So, it's sort of, I looked at it as sort of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. And at the time, we were very overcrowded. As in the past year, we've been as much as 550 inmates in a 184-bed facility, spending a lot of money with inmates in other counties because we can't house them all. And so we looked at coming up with a creative way, which at the time we called the Healing Center. A few things that we've done over the past couple of years was, tried to do the Healing Center. It really didn't work, but it did bring a lot of awareness. We turned around and tried to build a bigger jail, and it didn't work. But it did bring a lot of awareness, and I think it got it educated a lot of our constituents, and to try to come up with that solution that is going to benefit not only the health and safety of our community, but also the workforce.
Great. Yeah, awareness is key in this whole discussion and definitely bringing attention to these issues. So we'll move on to Representative Frazier. We know jail overcrowding continues, not just in Madison County, but in dozens of other counties across the Commonwealth to be an issue. So I know you filed a bill this year that tried to address that overcrowding, and that congrats. Give us an overview of that legislation.
Thank you very much, John. It's nice to be with you all today. And just to kind of back up on what Judge Taylor was expressing, because of the education that happened in our community and because of the background that we are in a growing county, we're right on I-75, we have a lot of economic opportunity. You would think that those would all be positive things, but what happened, like you said, in reality, it's created a hotbed of drug and opioid activity. We have a call once a week with community leaders and agency leaders. We instituted that because of the COVID situation. And, our coroner and our EMS director keep reminding us, although COVID is very serious, the real epidemic in our community is the opioid because of the increased runs, deaths, overdoses, that type of thing. So my bill at last session, House Bill 361, was basically to address the overcrowding situation, and overcrowding could be between jails. What happens is where they were looking at jail reports, and some jails were consistently overcrowded. Madison County was one of those. Some jails were consistently had capacity. So it's a way that jailers can talk to each other, transfer those prisoners, and we actually learned through the process that sometimes that was happening on an informal process, but this gives a more formal process. So it's a written agreement. They have 14 days once a prisoner is identified for transfer. It can't be any more than 2 contiguous judicial districts away, but it's just making the best use of the bed space that's available within the state. The other aspect of the bill is actually not between jails, but within a jail. Some beds are reserved for state prisoners, and this lets the jailer kind of make a decision also about being able to use that bed space. So some prisoners could be reclassified and placed in a different cell while remaining in that same jail. So the whole goal is just to make sure that we're using the current bed space to the fullest potential.
That makes total sense. And keeping with that, do you plan to file, or have you heard any rumblings about, similar legislation to tackle some of these issues coming up in the 2021 session? I mean, I know obviously conversations are ongoing, but just kind of curious if we might be able to expect to see some more, momentum.
Right. So there is a jail task force that's actually going on during the interim, and they're looking at things like pretrial custody, the duration of that. They're looking at ways that they can collect more data. We've all learned the value of data, and it can really drive the decisions. We looked at accumulation of bail credits, financial and non-financial conditions of release. So I know those are all topics that's on the agenda for the task force. So that's ongoing. But I also know future considerations from speaking with judges and that type of thing is there's been a push for a long time for them to be able to use technology for some of these hearings, and they've resisted a little bit, but because of COVID, they were forced to delve into that. And I think that they're finding some success, and that it is not quite a challenge as they thought it was once going to be. And so there's hope that might be able to be expanded a little bit. Naturally, the substance abuse programs, implementing those inside of jail, as well as outside of jail, just like Judge Taylor was talking about, is looking at ways to do that. And last session, Senator Higdon had a bill that would actually be a way of accrediting jails, for lack of a better word. And so those jails that were offering more services could be rewarded with higher per diems or that type of thing. And would also, just like Judge Taylor mentioned, having a jail task force, it would actually encourage them to have task forces within their own communities. So the jailer, the sheriff, the judges, the attorneys, that they were all would be incentivized to keep in good conversation with each other. So some of these common sense measures could come forward.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. All right, Senator Alvarado, I know you've been active in trying to tackle the opioid epidemic in our state in recent years. Let's start with you by talking about some of the strides made by the General Assembly to address, substance use disorder across the state.
So it's always a tough problem because we always talk about this. And I use the analogy, it's a bucket, with 50 holes in it. So government can plug a few of those holes, but the bucket will continue to leak water unless we have everybody kind of pulling in the same direction. So to fix the problem, it's going to take families, churches, businesses, or, local leaders, state leaders, federal leaders, everybody doing their part on trying to get folks back into society and back into some normalcy on that. there's a stigma around substance abuse, and that still continues to be a problem. That everybody, even those of us that think, well, yeah, okay, I can get around it, but there's still a stigma around it, and people that suffer with it feel a stigma with it, and it's important for us to reduce that. And as a doctor, I had the unfortunate occurrence of running into people that have overdosed in hospitals, talking to people that are being admitted for IV drug abuse or for other issues. And, when you talk to I'd say the vast majority of these individuals want help. They're running from something, they're hiding something. They've got, lots of reasons for substance abuse. And so you're trying to find a way to be able to reach them and get them the help. And sometimes they feel helpless. I've had a chance with Casey's Law evaluations. I volunteer to do those in my community. You talk to a lot of those folks, they're almost grateful that someone has kind of reported them to force them into rehab. It's also important really to be able to get medication-assisted treatment. That's the other big issue with that. And we've had some barriers in that stuff when it comes to insurance companies, some of the MCOs. I know that Kim Mosier has filed a bill now for several years in a row trying to get rid of prior authorization when it comes to existing treatments for MAT. We continue to try to have those discussions with the insurance companies, with the cabinet, in hopes of not having to file legislation, but just to open that up to allow treatment. The other big thing is in our jails, I'm part of a substance abuse recovery task force now, and I get to help chair that committee with Russell Weber. And we're charged really with looking at recommendations we can give to the cabinet and to the state to be able to make things easier for folks that once they do get into recovery to be able to get back into normal stream and maintain that recovery. And there's a lot of barriers. Some of them are within the jails. They encounter difficulties as far as getting treatment. I think the cabinet has applied for an 1115 waiver, which is pretty encouraging, to allow them to use Medicaid dollars for folks in our jails to start treatment while they're in jail. So they can start on those treatments, and then once they get released, they can continue in an outpatient setting. I think that's an ingenious idea and concept, and we were pretty pleased to hear that. But right now, otherwise, you can't use Medicaid money to help treat people that are in prison for those things. Other things we have is, a lot of our employers are having a hard time because part of recovery is, are getting employed and maintaining employment. And so for a lot of our members of our Chamber of Commerce, people that are employers out there that are looking for workers desperately, they'd love to hire these folks, but are worried about the liability, and they get charged with negligent hiring. I know Senator Matt Castlin had a bill this past year that was going to hopefully make that easier to reduce the liability for a couple of years for employers so they could hire these folks. I don't think that made it all the way through the process. Unfortunately, it made it through the Senate, but we're hoping to do things like that to encourage our employers to be able to hire these folks, give them a chance, and let them continue in that recovery. And so, a lot of it is difficult right now going through COVID-19. We just heard, Representative Frazier and I serve on health and welfare. We heard testimony yesterday from our epidemiologist in the state who talked about the increased number of substance abuse cases. There's graphs that have been in our local newspapers showing how many increase of fatal overdoses. And so even though we think we have policies that are, saving lives from COVID-19, it's potentially costing us lives for other people who suffer from other disorders as well. So it's always important for us to be conscious of this, that, a lot of the folks that go through this are people that are salvageable, that want to have help, they need help, and they're looking for it and just don't know how to get out of that cycle they get into. And it behooves all of us to be able to find resources and channel those folks in to get them the help, and then to make it easy to get them back into society and get them to where they're productive again. And so, there's so many success stories out there, but there's a lot of exciting examples throughout the state of programs that work not only from our jails, but through ARC in Eastern Kentucky, which are addiction recovery centers, the Isaiah House, which is a well-known facility down in Danville, and in Willisburg. A lot of really neat examples that we have out there to help people get back up on their feet. So the Recovery Task Force is something we may be reaching out to people who might be watching this today. If they have ideas of barriers they're encountering, we want people to come in and testify in that committee, either the employers or people that work within recovery centers that are looking for ways to help reduce barriers. We need those ideas because we need those recommendations for legislation in the near future. So a lot of exciting stuff. I think this is a bipartisan issue. Everybody wants to see people succeed in this realm. We know the need for a workforce. We want to make sure that people have an opportunity to get back up on their feet. And it's going to take us a generation, I think, to be able to reduce this. And it's going to take everybody pulling in the same direction as well. So thank you guys for hosting this. And thanks for the members that are willing to come on the panel as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for the insight. You definitely answered another one of my questions about the task force you were talking about there earlier, the opioid recovery task force. So, and kind of piggybacking on that, I'll turn to Judge Taylor Representative Frazier, I mean, what do you all think can be done moving forward to ensure, we're providing these fair chance opportunities for those reentering the workforce? And Dr. Alvarado, Senator Alvarado, I will add that Senator Castle's bill language was put into another bill, so we did end up getting that passed. That was
Good.
a priority for us here at the chamber, and something we were working on. So we were happy to see that. Judge or Representative, any insight you all want to add to that for the? Yeah.
Well, I can speak to two additional pieces of legislation that when I was researching this, I wasn't exactly sure what had made it all the way through the finish line or not, but actually House Bill 284 establishes work for time credit. So those that are on probation for a 40-hour week, you would be able to earn 1 day of bail credit. And so that is in positive reinforcement, encouraging good behavior. And so that's something that will also help. And House Bill 327 was an expungement for dismissed and acquitted charges. And so that is something that's going to make it easier for them to find employment where, the charges were dismissed or dismissed without with prejudice with grand jury.
Absolutely.
Also in our community, EKU has a workforce development program, and they are very active they are helping prisoners upon release with resume, with interview skills, with also in some instances, some OSHA safety classes. So they can come out with some types of certifications, which will help them get that job, which is, as Dr. Alvarado indicated, is critical for them staying on the right path, is having something to look forward to and having something that they want to keep and strive to do.
Judge, anything to add?
Yeah, well, from years past, obviously before I was in an elected position, that, the state and the corrections facility decided to allow local county jails to start housing the Class Ds, so the lower offenses, some Class Cs, I think under 5 years of a sentence. And at the time, that might have been good for the Commonwealth. But looking at it now, our local jail facilities were built to be temporary facilities. They weren't built to be rehabilitation centers. They weren't built to be medical facilities or mental health facilities. And so at the local level, we've got, I think, over half of the state's jail populations are sitting and spending their time or their sentence in our local jails. And so it's very difficult when, 85% of the inmate population is possibly drug-related crimes to be able to rehabilitate them. Senator Alvarado talked about Medicaid, the Medicaid's not able to be used, or it's not valid during the incarceration times. And so, we're sitting here and we're housing these individuals that obviously need rehabilitation. It's a mental illness. How do we get in our jails to be able to rehabilitate them, to allow them to have the opportunity to come out and live a more productive life, to educate them, help them find that path that they can get on. So many of our government assistance in this rehabilitation world, is a little messed up, in my opinion, just because the facts of the reimbursement back is 30 days, is that high intense treatment. Then you can get 60 days of reimbursement for outpatient. But you have an individual that has been, on drugs, has been, a scourge to society and somewhat for 10 years. And our process and our setup is for them to get clean and live a productive life in 90 days. I think that some of our ways going about this is really, we're not going to have solutions until we start taking some drastic measures to invest in people's lives. And that's where I think we have a return on investment, building program models that have community involvement, have our industry and our businesses involved in, sponsoring these individuals, get them in a longer term program to where that these individuals come out on the other side and are taxpayers. You know, we talk a lot of times about, you know, the big elephant in the room when it comes to taxes is, and I know this very well, is just raising taxes, whether that be property taxes or an insurance premium tax. You know, others you'll hear talk about growing our tax base. That, you know, that's the way for governments to be able to increase revenues as well. But you never hear a whole lot of talk about investing into individuals that are living in a sense off the taxpayers in some way and creating them to become taxpayers. And I think that is one way that if we could put our focus into the education, to the bringing local communities together. I've tried it at the local level. You know, it's very difficult for leaders at the local level, our county judges, to with the dynamics and the structure of government, us being an arm of the state, it's very difficult to be able to make these decisions all on our own, and without having assistance from our state legislative elected officials. And one of the things I would encourage too is that in a lot of these committees, you know, I would encourage our legislature to, you know, get assistance from us at the county level. To be able to potentially sit down on a task force, to be able to be that local representative that in a sense is in the trenches every day, the financial burdens that it puts on us at the local level, to make sure that we are a team and that we're combating this together. You know, this is not a local elected problem. This is not a state problem. This is a community problem. We have to have all involved to quit turning a blind eye to this drug epidemic, because ultimately that's the root of the problem. The criminal justice reform is the drug epidemic.
Sure. No, and then that brings me to another point and a question from one of our registrants here today. They say paying for substance abuse and rehab programs are a sticking point for implementation, which I totally agree. I mean, I think everyone supports these types of programs, but if we don't have the funding for them, we're kind of stuck. So how do we fund them? What kind of discussions have we been having, you know, at the state level and at the local level? This can be for any of our panelists, so feel free to jump in. But yeah, how can we fund these? What are some innovative ways we can try to take a look at these?
So obviously we've got some grants that have been awarded, which is great to look into that. I think the university got the fairly $87 million from the HEAL grant now to look at, and our task force is in charged with looking at that and how that money is going to be spent and used for specific counties to look at some of those ideas. Again, like the judge says, every jail, you know, my jailers in my district, every jailer I had a chance to talk to last year during a statewide campaign, all had the same issues. Everybody was struggling just because of this very issue. And you know, like anything, I often as a doctor complain about how insurance companies use their monies, that they put them in silos, pharmaceutical costs, hospital costs, everything is compartmentalized instead of looking at everything broadly. And I think in government, we're often guilty of the same thing, that we look at jail costs, medical costs, and those are separate, when in reality in this are kind of blended together. And as a state, on a state level, we're restricted by what the feds allow us to use with Medicaid funds. We're not allowed to use Medicaid funds however we want to. They've got to be used for specific purposes. And on a federal level, it's not legal for us to use Medicaid funds for people when they're incarcerated. So this 1115 waiver that's been applied by the cabinet is to open that up, to say, hey, we can use Medicaid funds now for people while they're in jail. And then you can get some of these, you know, institutions that do very good inpatient therapy for a lot of folks for 6 to 12 months at a time. And while someone's serving their sentence, they can start the treatment course and start the medication and get that treatment covered through Medicaid would be ideal. I think it'd be great. We talk about Medicaid block granting. That's something every state would love to have, is just to have the flexibility to spend Medicaid dollars for what is best for our state, not based on what the federal government dictates. And right now we're held by a lot of strings on that level. So I know our representation here in Kentucky, our congressmen and senators are supportive of the idea of block granting for Medicaid. There's a lot of people in the healthcare profession that are nervous, that they think that's going to mean less for them or less for, you know, for different parts of it. But it would give us the flexibility to use those dollars where it's needed here, and again, start blurring those lines of compartmentalizing jail costs and healthcare costs, being able to blend those together and be able to help our local governments in that regard. So I think that's one of the things we can do is if they can start giving the states more flexibility in how to spend that money, we'll use it more wisely, and it'll have plenty of ramifications. If you keep it all separate, it just makes it tough. I mean, people come into our jails, they get released, they might go to rehab for 2-3 months, and some of these folks need a full 12-month inpatient rehab to really get the benefit. And then they wind up getting released. There's recidivism, they go back to jail, and you get this cycle that never ends. We've got to find a way to stop that. And so I think there's unique ideas in that regard, but we've got to find a way to be able to get some flexibility on a state level to use those federal dollars.
Representative Frazier or Judge Taylor, you all want to jump in there, or I think you pretty much covered it?
At the local level, I mean, we are so strapped. Counties across the Commonwealth are financially strapped. We're limited on our revenue possibilities. We have so many counties across the Commonwealth have so many different rules based off population. I'm sure you've heard before that there's no one county alike, and that's so true. But we are always advocating for ways that we can be more efficient. My colleagues across the state, we're all having the same issue with jails. Jails, there is no revenue stream. And we support the public safety, right? I mean, we support law enforcement to make sure that our communities are safe. But I think one of the things that would help is just, and I would encourage, is citizens, business owners across the Commonwealth to start bringing awareness and start understanding what these jails mean and who actually is paying for them, and it's at the local level, and it's through mostly property tax dollars. We bring in approximately $4 million in Madison County on property taxes, and my jails budget alone this year is almost $5 million. It's not going to take long to not be able to do other things, and so I'm 100% on board with whatever I could be a part of at the local level, at the state level. CAECO is a wonderful organization that has tremendous knowledge at the local level. CAECO, Kentucky Association of Counties, represents all the local county officials. I mean, you got Commonwealth attorneys, you got county attorneys, you got law enforcement. And so, I would encourage to tap into that resource to help put a task force together and be a part of a solution.
Absolutely. So, as you said that, Judge, we do have, decent representation on this webinar from the business community. So this can be for any and all of the panelists as well. What message would you have for businesses and employers in terms of how can they help those in recovery, and how can we work together as businesses and government and kind of come together to solve these tough issues? I mean, obviously we've discussed some legislation that's been productive, but if you had one message, kind of to say, hey, to the business community, what can we do?
I know in our community, we have a gentleman that has been very forthright in hiring those on release. And so it's, it's giving them something to look forward to. And again, it goes back to that, having them have marketable skills when they're leaving the jail, or you're going to go back to that recidivism, as Judge Taylor was referring to earlier. So being willing to take a chance. And then, as Senator Alvarado said, if we can have some of those leniencies, so there's not as much liability on the employer side, I think that would might bring others to the table to help out in the situation.
I think, and again, for Representative Frazier's point, it's a everybody knows I'm the lightning rod on liability reform and on tort reform in our state, because I've been very vocal and I'm disliked by a lot of attorneys throughout our state because of that. But that's the reality. That's the crux of a lot of the problems. Why employers, some of them are desperate for employees. And right now, obviously, our unemployment's through the roof with COVID. But prior to this, the biggest thing we had was workforce development and finding how many people. We said, boy, look at our jails and look at how many people are incarcerated. All those folks that were working would take care of our problems, but how can we get them, in? So people would hire somebody, they interviewed them, they sounded great, everything was wonderful. You'd hire them, you do their background check after they were hired, and you've got a charge on your past. I can't afford to have the risk of having you work here because if something goes bad, I'm going to get sued by somebody for that. And they let them go right away. And I know a lot of employers out there that are watching have heard that or they've experienced that themselves because they don't want that liability. Until we start fixing the liability problems in this state, and it's more, you know, it goes throughout everything. It goes beyond healthcare because everybody thinks it's all I care about. It's in the business community. And I can't tell you how many folks have approached me with concerns in that regard. But it's a matter of starting to put pressure on our legislators and on the people that represent us to say, we need this done and we need this accomplished, to start selling that to our communities, letting them know how much that actually costs, not only in lost employment for people that are trying to recover, but also just how much more their services cost because of that liability. That education needs to start statewide to make sure that people know exactly, you know, how bad things have gotten in that regard. And, you know, right now people just, they think, oh, you have an insurance company, they're covering the cost. It doesn't hurt that person at all. We all know that that's not true because everybody's rates go up. Even if you settle things, your rates wind up going up. So we've got to start educating people on that ramification. I think that still is the biggest reason why most of our employers don't want that risk. It's just that risk, and to mitigate that risk, we've got to change our culture and how we approach that and start passing laws to start limiting that risk and that liability for everybody. So I would encourage you to do that as much as you can.
Good point. I'm going to move on to a few more questions from our that were submitted by our registrants here. One of them says that pretrial detention in jails has been greatly reduced during the pandemic. And I know, you know, bail reform has been a topic of conversation in the General Assembly, and they ask, how can we keep this up? So maybe just give your own personal view on you know, bail reform and you know, pretrial detention in jails and at the local level because of, you know, these low-level drug offenses, and just give your thoughts on that. Let's start with you, Judge, on that regard.
You know, I hate the fact that that it took a pandemic to show that we can reduce the number of people incarcerated in our jails, whether that be through pretrial with lowering bonds, what have you. You know, I look back there earlier, just looking at what our inmate population has done in the last 9 months. And in September of last year, we had 550 inmates that were really county inmates. We really couldn't house state inmates because we didn't have enough room. And so today, I don't have the exact number, but I'd say we're around 250 inmates of just county inmates. We might have 50 state inmates, so we're about a 300 population. And so, you know, working with pretrial and the judicial branch, you know, working together to come up with ways. I think Deanna meant there. Sorry, Representative Frazier, that she mentioned earlier about you know, the camera courts and using technology. And I think that has really helped a lot. But I don't think we can stop there. My fear is that when this pandemic's over, that we could go back, or that these individuals that aren't that are getting released now will not show up for their court date, and then there's a bench warrant put out, which brings them back to our jail. So I have some great concerns and hope that we can work through those between now and the time that this pandemic and the courts and stuff open back up.
I know Senator Westerfield has talked about, you know, bail reform. That's been high on his list of things he'd like to see done. We're going to have, to the judge's point, we're going to have a lot of statistics after this COVID-19 situation goes down to look back and see, okay, you know, a lot of folks have been released. They're back under house arrest, a lot of them, where the people they had, you know, did they leave their homes? Were there people that violated those orders? We'll have a chance to take a look and see how well that worked. And if it worked well, it might give us a model to start looking at that. I mean, you're going to want certain offenses are going to be kept in jails. Things that are violent offenders are going to have to stay. I think, but if it's nonviolent offenses, somebody that isn't doing things repeatedly, I think we have an opportunity to really take a look at that. I'm no expert on bail reform. I know Whitney Westerfield has his office right next to mine, so we often chat about a lot of different concepts and things that he's contemplating, but I think he has a tremendous interest in this. It makes sense. There are some states that have done it, and there's folks out there who think, hey, you just put criminals back on the street. So there's there's a risk there, as we've passed bills before to help try to lower our jail populations, and they backfired a bit. People said they didn't work. We want to make sure they get something that's reasonable, that's going to give an opportunity to kind of deburden our jails and give us that opportunity. So I think there's some interest in it. I think in the General Assembly, at least in the Senate, there is. Maybe Representative Frazier could talk about the House and see how they feel about it. But I think it's something that's worth exploring, and we'll have some statistics to base those decisions off of, I'm sure, by next year.
And I want to add too, if you don't mind, but that we have to try to speed up the process. It's killing counties at the local level because, until you're sentenced, you don't become a state inmate. You're on the county dime only. It's killing us at the local level because, if it takes somebody a year and a half, and I'm just using these as an example, but if it takes somebody a year and a half to go through the process and get sentenced, and they get 2 years, they get credit for time served. And so they've been a year and a half on the county dime. And then the counties only will collect on that state money for 6 months. Or maybe they get credit for time served and they never even spend any more time in jail. And so I really feel like that, and if you look even at the federal model it speeds that process up. And again, there's a model there that obviously works better than our state model. Can we potentially, look at something in that federal model to see if it helps us at the state level and at the local level where it speeds that process up.
Yeah, and I would just like to go back to what Senator Alvarado was saying about his comparison to healthcare with the silos. I think some of that happens because the criminal justice problem is so big. You've got the Jailers Association, the sheriffs, the office of the courts, the judges, and so sometimes by not having shared information or coordinated efforts, for example, I was in court one day and they would get someone in and they've been deferred a couple of times already. And then they finally get there and then they go, oh, well, we don't have the lab. And then we found out that the labs were a big problem. So it's just a matter of everyone being on the same page and sharing information and trying to, streamline the process, like Judge Taylor said, so the process doesn't take so long.
I'm going to do one more question before we go to some closing thoughts. One more question from one of our registrants. Let me pull it up here, but I think it's someone from the KCTCS system asks, how can local workforce development folks assist with this overall initiative? Because I think, the education element of this is key.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying with some of the efforts that EKU is already doing with the population by, some of that jobs and skills training, even if it's just mock interviews or looking over a resume, showing someone how to do a resume. And then, some of the certifications and training that they can do on probation are going to be helpful. We also passed in 2019, KEYS money can now be used for vocational training. So, there's all kinds of training that can take place.
Judge or Senator, anything to add to that before we?
No, I think there's a lot of, again, when you get into a lot of the long-term recovery facilities, that's part of their recovery is teaching them a lot of those skills and getting them ready for the workforce. So, and again, our jails could do that. I think it's just a matter of its funding and it's having assistance in that regard. That's the struggle. I think a lot of our jails do a really good job, depending on the counties and what, they have space to do some of these things. But, a lot of our jails also, some of them are older facilities, they're cramped, they only have so much room. And so they struggle because they don't have the funding to be able to invest into that, to expand it. But I think those things are being taught in a lot of our long-term facilities.
And I would agree with them. I think Senator Alvarado just said it best, long-term facilities. We're fooling ourselves if we're expecting somebody that's been on drugs, hooked on heroin for 10 years to get off of it in 90 days. We have to invest in these individuals' lives, like I said earlier, to become a taxpayer. And that's a way that you can lower taxes. The more people we have paying, lowers everybody else's. And I think a lot of times there's a return on investment in that alone. and citizens, business leaders, community leaders, have to come together and support each other in this endeavor. They have to. I guess we're going to get final comments. I started just to go on into my final comment there, John. If you
totally fine, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll let you go ahead and start with the final comment. Sure.
Yeah. I want to encourage that. We all three are elected officials in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we have to feel support in those hard times. And I've been there in Madison County. I've spoke at my State of the County addresses about the need for more money and raising taxes, and I've gotten standing ovations. I've gotten support since I've been in office. But when it came time to, in a sense, sort of pay up, right, pay the piper, it was all the criticism that killed it. And you had a small group that was the loud minority. And if you do support your elected officials, show them you support. Be vocal. Get behind us all on the decisions that we have to make. It is a tough time. It's a tough time right now in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but we can do it if we have the support of our businesses, if we have support of our citizens to take these drastic steps that will improve the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that will make us to be more marketable, to be more competitive against our other states. We have a beautiful state. We have hardworking people, but we also have sick people, and the sick people that need to be well. And so I would encourage those across the Commonwealth to get behind the elected officials and support them in these tough decisions that we have in the future.
So they're fixing my computer, but
Yeah, I just think we have to be very community minded. Judge Taylor and I, he teases a lot of times that we're the big brother and he's the little brother, and that everything that we do, shouldn't be picking on the little brother, So we shouldn't look at things in silos of being the county government, the state government. And I think it's very appropriate what you said. It's not just a criminal justice problem, it's a community problem. And we all need to work together. And the more that we do that, then we're going to come to a solution faster. And just like Senator Alvarado said, I think that there's experts in every county that are willing to share their information, and we need to do a better job of listening and getting them here so we can do some of these targeted efforts, because this is something that we're just going to have to take little bites at the apple because of all the different agencies that are involved. So the more input we have, then the more information we have to work with.
So, and basing off of an apple biting reference, I look at it as a hole in the bucket. And so everybody has to ask themselves, which hole are you going to plug? Everybody on a problem like this thinks that someone else is going to fix this for us. It's a problem, it's out there, so someone else is going to do the fixing for it. And one person can't plug all 50 holes in the bucket. Each of us needs to find one that we can plug. And if everybody does their little part, then the bucket will carry water, will move forward. So what I would encourage everybody to do, these are problems we all know exist. We all know they're out there. It's a matter of being active. I think legislators, yes, they can pass laws. As a doctor, what have I done? I'm seeing people with Casey's Law evaluations for free. I just applied for my X waiver for substance use disorder. I never thought I'd do that, ever. But I was asked for a facility. They asked me to help them supervise some of this stuff. And so I'm getting involved in this fight. Everybody needs to take up a little bit of the cross and say, okay, how far are we going to pull this? Because if we all do it together, it'll get fixed. But if we're expecting government to fix it, it's not going to get fixed. If it's just going to be churches, it's not going to fix. It's going to be schools, churches, homes, communities, all of these things. Everybody doing a little bit, and if we all do a little bit, destigmatize the problem and stay engaged, we'll get this thing fixed. It's going to take a while. It's not an easy. It won't be a quick overnight. In a week, we're going to see numbers turned around. It's going to be a gradual ramp up to see this kind of resolved. And teaching a generation, the right way to handle stressors and a lot of these things, and not to resort to this. So it's going to take a lot of people pulling in the same direction. I always encourage us all as American citizens, our responsibilities are to vote, first of all, but then also to be engaged in some way or other to help get society better. And we are all in public service to improve our communities and to do that sort of thing. So we're all part of that. And I would just encourage everybody, one way or another, if it's a company that hires 2, 3, 5 people, and hey, it's our little experiment, how do we do with these folks and they get better? You've done a little bit of your part. If every company can do that, slowly but surely the Commonwealth gets transformed and we can get back on our feet on this problem again. So I would just encourage everybody, find some way that you can help. You know, there's a great story, everybody sort of deviate, and, you know, the Perez's and their story about their restaurant and how they had one of their really treasured employees and found that they were using drugs. They were very concerned. They were people of faith and prayed about that, and it had a burden on them and how they could help that individual. And it led to them opening up a business that was dedicated just to helping folks in recovery, and they themselves having struggled with some of those things too. So we can take an example from individuals like that we can all look and say, what can I do in a little way? And each of us does a little part, and the whole problem will get fixed before you know it. So I would just encourage all of you to look at that and see what you can do to help.
So that brings me to a great point. One little part that everyone in this Zoom call can do is go to KentuckyComeback.com, which is our website for this whole campaign, where we are building a network of supporters for these criminal justice reform initiatives that we've discussed today. So all you have to do, go to KentuckyComeback.com, click on the button on our homepage that says join the network, and you'll start getting emails about different ways that you can get involved. I encourage everyone to do that. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists today for participating, and thanks to all those who tuned in, and thanks to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative for their support with our Kentucky Comeback campaign. So thank you all again. We're definitely going to do some more of these webinars. I think this was very productive. So make sure you sign up and stay tuned. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.